שלא אחנו ברכו אמוני, סבנו ואותנו כדבר אדוני.
Thank you for joining me today. We're going to study some Parashat HaShavuah again. This is the third class, and I hope you've been enjoying it. The classes are recorded and are posted if you want to review. This week is a double Parsha. As you know, there are more Parshas in the Torah. There are 54 Parshiot in the Torah. That's way more than we have available for us to read during the course of the Jewish year. And so we read two on certain Shabbats. We double up, and this is one of those Shabbatot. And the rabbis do us a big favor because they're doubling up two parshas that aren't the easiest to decipher and not the most interesting. They're the parshiot of Tazria-Metzora. I always tell our b'nai mitzvahs who get quote unquote stuck with Tazria-Metzora, you've got to be really smart. This is a parsha that's chosen you, so you have to be very smart, very insightful and wise to be able to find the meaning in parshas which concern themselves with leprosy and other diseases that can enter your home, and basically the theme of purity and impurity. So in the book of Leviticus and elsewhere in the Bible as well, that's a big theme of the Torah. There are those who say that it is a theme that no longer applies to Jewish life today, but in the time of the Bible, it was very, very important that service to God was performed in a state of purity, and also that those who were impure were classified as such, and those who were pure were classified as such as well, so that it be known who's pure and who's impure. And of all of those kinds of impurities, the most serious, clearly, is leprosy, tzara'at. And tzara'at is what these two parshas concern themselves with the most. And I say it's clear that these are the most serious of all the impurities, because the rituals that the person has to go through in order to get back to a state of purity is more complicated and more intense than any other kinds of impurities that we find in the Bible. It's a gradual process. When you are discovered to have tzara'at, there's a gradual process whereby you rejoin the community. You don't just go from impurity to purity. It's sort of like when you have a loss in your family, you don't go directly from the cemetery to work the next day. There's a gradual state of rejoining the community, beginning with Shiva, then Shloshim, and then a year of mourning until life gets back to some sort of normal. It's not instant. And by the way, death and impurity have a lot to do with each other in the Torah. So it's not by coincidence that the two rituals for returning to the community, both from Shiva and from Tzara'at, are similar. So there's rituals that a person who's been declared to have Tzara'at has to go through in order to get back to a state of purity. And that's what we're going to look at today. One of the ways that we learn the Parsha of the week is by understanding and studying how text from the Torah at its face value can take on a whole other meaning when interpreted by the rabbinic sages. The rabbinic sages is almost like a lens through which we view the Torah. And some of you might know that there is a strong connection between tzara'at, or leprosy, and a particular sin. The rabbis, they debate, well, this is so bad, this leprosy. What caused it? How did a person get this affliction? And most find within, it's a Talmudic reading, find within that word sarat a hint to star or trouble, and then motzi shem ra, metzora, Tazria-Metzora, motzi shem ra. What does motzi shem ra mean? Bringing about a bad shem, an evil name. You're defaming somebody, you're slandering them. And so the rabbinic view on these parshas is that this is really not about some skin disease. It's about something deeper. It's about the punishment that a person receives when they speak ill of others, when they slander them. And in the time of the Bible, sarat would be the affliction that you were cursed with if you were somebody who enjoyed gossiping about others, particularly in a way that would defame them. So let's learn. We're going to look today at the beginning of Parashat Metzora, which is the second of the two parshas that we're going to read. And I'm going to show you how Rashi understands in a very, you know Rashi, right? The great interpreter of the Bible. How Rashi understands the particular tools by which the Metzora is made pure again, to all be symbolic of the sin of gossip and what leads a person to gossip and what leads them not to gossip. So I'm going to share my screen with you now as we review the first chapter. Can you give me a thumbs up if you see it? As we review the first chapter of Tazria-Metzora. Here is Metzora, and at the bottom is Rashi's commentary. We're just going to read the first 4 verses. And Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "This shall be the law regarding the person with tzarad on the day of his purification. He shall be brought to the Kohen." So let's take for granted that this person who has been found to have this disease, tzarad, has been placed outside of the camp. He's unclean. And then he's waited some time, and the Torah, by the way, prescribes how long he has to wait, and then looks at his skin, and his skin looks great. And he says, I'm ready to begin the process to come back to the community. So the first thing the Torah tells you is he has to be brought to the Kohen. The Kohen is the one who is checking to make sure that his claim that the tzarad is now gone is indeed true. So the Kohen goes out, look at verse 3, shall go out beyond the encampment, right? So the person who has the affliction stays outside. He's not brought in. He stays outside. The Kohen goes out to visit him. The Kohen shall see, and behold, the skin eruption of the tzaras has healed from the person with tzarad. So the Kohen makes sure that the claim, he verifies the claim, and indeed discovers that it's gone. And now the purification ritual begins. So look at the purification ritual, in particular the tools that are used for the purification ritual. The Kohen shall command to take for the person undergoing purification. The word is mitaher. Mitaher is an active verb. It means the one who is being purified. So once the Kohen has determined that the tzarad is gone, you enter the state of active purification. And what do we need? Shtei tziporim chayot tehorot. 2 live, pure birds. Now that's interesting. He doesn't just take a shower. We need birds to bring him back to the camp. Next page. Eitz erez, we need cedar wood. Shni tolat, a shni tolat is a fabric that is the color of crimson, just sort of red. Ve'ezov, and hyssop. Hyssop is a tall kind of grass. And these are the tools. So there are 4 tools here that are needed to bring the person with Tzara'at back into the camp. Again, let's repeat them. The birds, the cedar wood, the crimson thread, and the hyssop. Now, this is why we do Parashat HaShavuah, everybody, because if you didn't have this class and you were sitting in shul and reading this, you would go through that verse in 2 seconds and go, boring. Next, when does this get interesting? Where's the story? Why does this matter? And this is why Parashat HaShavuah is interesting, because it takes these ideas and tries to draw meaning from each one, in particular, these 4 tools. And Rashi finds a way to connect these tools to the sin which brought the person to be afflicted with this leprosy in the first place, right? And that is his malicious gossip. So Rashi finds in these 4 tools something to do with that sin of gossip. Let's start with the birds. Let me zoom in a little bit. This is Rashi at the bottom. Prat le'of tameh. Prat means excluding an unclean bird. It has to be a clean bird. In other words, a bird that you can eat, a kosher bird. Lefi shehanega'im ba'in, because these afflictions came al lashon hara. They came to this person because he or she spoke evil speech. Shehu ma'aseh pitputei devarim. Get that word, pitputei. What does that sound like? Pitputei. The English translation here is chirping. What is the person doing when they're gossiping? They're chirping. Why do birds chirp? Birds chirp because they feel like chirping. Because it doesn't serve any purpose. It just is music, sound, blah, blah, blah. Pitputei. So the birds and their chirping reminds the person who has tzarat why they were afflicted with that disease in the first case. Lefichach huzkeku letaharatot siporim shemepatpetin tamid betzifzof hakol. Therefore, in order for this person to be purified, we need some chattering birds, which chatter endlessly with twittering sounds. And this is very interesting. We have birds there, and there are 2 of them. 2 birds that are yapping, so that the person sees, look what a person sounds like when they gossip. They're just making noises one to the other, singing nonsense, not contributing anything to the world, and sometimes even conflicting with each other, right? You have 2 birds, yapping, and sometimes when they're singing together at the same time, it's just noise. Isn't that interesting? That's the first explanation of Rashi on the birds. Now the cedar wood. What is interesting about a cedar? Cedar, eitz erez, is well known to those who are familiar with Solomon's building of the temple, you know that it was a very important wood or construction material in the building of Solomon's temple that's brought from, because it's the strongest wood and the biggest wood. They grow in Lebanon. The famous song on Friday night, Sadiq Katamar Yifrach, Ke'erez Balevanon Yiskeh. The righteous shall flourish like a palm tree or like a cedar in Lebanon. So what are we saying in that verse? What do we learn about cedar wood? Well, it's very tall and strong and high and mighty. So what does Rashi say? Wood of a tall tree was selected because these eruptions come as punishment for gasut haruach, haughtiness of spirit. So Rashi continues in his explanation for why this person was afflicted in the first place. It's not just that they were chirping. It's deeper. It's from an arrogance that makes them think that they are taller than other people, that they're better than everybody else. The sin of haughtiness or pride. And that's why it is brought to this ceremony. Again, to remind the person, you think that you're a cedar and everybody else is just a low tree. Well, wood is wood. And in the end, you can chop it down whichever way you would like. It's a reminder to that person at the time when he's brought into the camp that he is no better than others and should be careful not to be of arrogant spirit, which sometimes leads one to slander others and to make others little in your eyes. Now, what about the red string, the shni tola'at? Shni tola'at. Well, Rashi says, what is his cure that he may be healed? He should lower himself from his arrogance like a worm and like hyssop. Now, why a worm? Tola'at, shni tola'at, right? It means in the Bible crimson. But tola'at also means worms and bugs and insects. And the reason why there's a connection is because this is how in the biblical world they used to make color, right? They would use the blood of an insect and that would color their clothing. That was their dye to color their clothing. You might know that the tzitzit had to be made of techelet in the Bible. It had to have a patil techelet, a string of a blue. Techelet is still the word we use today, kachol, for blue. But where did that blue come from? It came from a certain snail that had a blue blood. So all of the dyes used to come from animals. So Rashi says, why do we have a sheni tolat, the red string, to remind you that you're not an erez? Don't compare yourself to the cedar tree that's bigger than everybody else. Think of yourself as the tolaat, the worm, whose red dye is used to color that string. And when you realize that in the face of God and the beauty and the majesty of the world, we are just finite creatures, no better in many ways than other creatures in the world, even insects, it will make you humble, and humility will prevent you from speaking about others. If you're speaking about others thinking that they're so bad. Remind yourself of your own faults and your own imperfections. And when you consider those, you'll be more careful criticizing others. Isn't this interesting? So Rashi has an interpretation for each one of these three things. And now the fourth. What's the fourth? The hyssop. Now, the hyssop to me is the most interesting. We don't really know. It seems that what Rashi is saying is that hyssop, which grows in great bounty in Israel. You see hyssop all over the place. It seems like what Rashi might be saying is, remember that you're just like everybody else, right? Because hyssop is such a bountiful, I don't know what you call it, not a grain, but a bountiful grass almost in Israel. And you find it everywhere. Remember that you're nothing special too. You're just like everybody else. And maybe that will prevent you from gossiping about others. Rashi could also be saying that it's not that hyssop is so plentiful. It's that hyssop it all looks the same. Hyssop is similar, identical, one next to the other. So maybe Rashi means to say that it's not that there's hyssop everywhere and you're so common, but that you're the same as everybody else. Think about what you have in common with others before you think about what makes you different than them. That's another possibility. Another is that hyssop grows very low. Maybe Rashi is saying, well, as opposed to the cedar, which is very high, hyssop is sort of the vegetation that is the lowest. It's just a bit taller than grass. And that will bring you down to earth if you think of hyssop. But I'll give you my take on why Rashi says hyssop should remind the gossiper to be of low spirit. I learned this from a friend. Where else do we know hyssop from? Hyssop was used in the original Passover. The hyssop was tied together and dipped in the blood of the Paschal lamb, dipped in the blood of the Passover sacrifice. And what was done with it? It was painted on the doorposts of the homes, of the Jewish homes, so that the angel of death would know to pass over them. It was hyssop that was prescribed to be used because it's like a cheap paintbrush. But it was like I said, it's a variety of vegetation that's very, very plentiful, easy to find. Dip it in the blood, paint it on the doorstep. Rashi, in his explanation, is very murky about why hyssop. He just says, what is his cure that he may be healed? He should lower himself from his arrogance like a worm and like a hyssop. But he doesn't say why hyssop lowers you from your arrogance. That's why there's all these different explanations. But I like this one, that hyssop reminds you of the Paschal sacrifice. Why? Because when a person realizes that they are just a blip in history, that the world began much earlier than they were born and will continue much later than after you're gone, you will gain a certain humility that comes from perspective. Humility that comes from understanding where you are in history. It expands your realm of concerns and interests, expands the circle of things that maybe bother you in the moment, but that really shouldn't bother you in the scheme of bigger things. Why are you speaking badly about a certain person? Why do you care? The world is a much bigger place. There are bigger things to care about. It was around before you, and it'll be around after you. Think of hyssop. Think of the Exodus from Egypt, where our ancestors came from, what their experience was. And when you consider your place in history, maybe it won't bother you so much that this other person is doing something that you don't like, or this other person has something that you want, and it brings you to speak something evil about them or something untrue about them. So each one, I don't know what you think of that interpretation, but each one, right? What is the role of hyssop? Is it to remind you of lowliness? It could be to remind you of history. It could be to remind you of similarity, that we're all really the same. It can, it can be there to remind you of how vast it is, how plentiful it is, right? You can find it anywhere. And each one of those thoughts brings a person humility. And the idea of Rashi is, if you're humble, you won't gossip, because you'll realize that you're not much better than anybody else. So why criticize others? If you're like a cedar tree and you think you're better than everybody else, or that you're a bird and that people enjoy hearing you chirp, chirp, chirp all day long, then you'll continue to gossip. So each one serves a symbolic role. And now, when you arrive at that verse, when you listen to the Torah reading, won't just glance over it. You'll say, hey, there's actually something interesting here that we can learn, so that we can become better friends to others, better members of the community, and so we can become the best versions of ourselves, right? There's the famous Hasidic story, you know this one, the two notes that a person should have in their pockets at all times. One note should say that I am, for me, bishvili nivra ha'olam, for me, the whole world was created. You have to have some dignity. You have to believe in yourself. You have to have strength. That's what that pocket is for. But in the other pocket, you should have a note saying, Anochi afar ve'efer. Here I am, just the dirt of the earth, right? And when you're feeling a little bit too strong and mighty, you need that pocket to remind you, hey, I'm just a regular person like everybody else, no better than anybody else. And the trick in life is to know when to reach into each pocket. So look how long before that story was invented, Rashi has his own story about the birds and the cedar tree in this pocket, and the hyssop and the crimson in the other one, balancing each other out. And that is the key in life to navigating relationships successfully and becoming effective citizens and effective Jews successfully. Just to know when to reach in to each pocket. And it turns out that is by that very ritual that a person who is stricken with tzarat can be admitted back into the camp. Thank you, everybody. I hope you learned something in the past half hour about the Parsha, and I'll see you next week. You know the time, Monday, 2:15. Have a great day.